because if we are off the balance beam of basic safety, right, if we've experienced a hit to our sense that everything is fine, I sometimes like to think about that as experiencing more threat than love. Our brain closes off temporarily some of the structures that we really need. So the brain essentially develops from down and back to top and front. And that is also the order in which the brain will prioritize resources in a given moment, right? So the down and back stuff is very survivally. All the way at the bottom of the brainstem, we're really just talking about, are the lungs pumping? Is the heart doing what it needs to do? Is the machine of the body literally staying alive? Then as we get a little further up in the brain, okay, now we do have some emotions, but it's in like the amygdala, so it's very primal, right? It's still really about survival or propagating the species, right? These are still very big emotions that can lead to big body movements, big behaviors, because they are still in the service of survival. And then as the brain develops a little bit more, okay, we get some language, right? We get a little bit more memory. And then it isn't until way up here, right, at the very, very, very tippy toppest and frontest of the brain that we get to the prefrontal cortex, right? So that is really the seat of so many qualities that we often start out looking for out of children in our spaces when we're working with them. And that we also certainly look for in ourselves throughout the workday. So some examples of those are problem solving, perspective taking, empathy, and curiosity. So those are governed by what I call this very flimsy brain structure, the prefrontal cortex. It's flimsy in a few ways. So firstly, it's flimsy because it doesn't even finish developing until the mid to late 20s under the best of circumstances, right? It's also flimsy because it's really not related to survival. So even if we have a fully developed prefrontal cortex, right? So even for me as an adult, hopefully I have a pretty well developed prefrontal cortex. That doesn't mean I can always access it, right? So if I am having a very stressful day, week, month, the survival parts of my brain are going to take a lot of the resources, right? Because my brain's going to say, look, Jillian doesn't need to worry about perspective taking right now. There's enough stress hormone in Jillian's body that we got to think she's running from a bear. So we're going to focus on running from a bear. We're not going to focus on curiosity. And the brain will literally just not send resources to the prefrontal cortex. So that means that this is true for us and true for our students, unless basic safety is on board. It's not just that kids won't show up this way, ready to problem solve, perspective take, be empathetic and curious, but actually that they cannot, right? That there's almost like a switch in the brain that just turns that off until safety is restored. And basic safety in this sense, again, means experiencing more love, more belonging than threat. So said a different way, under stress, all humans are thrown out of basic safety and into survival mode, which blocks what I call, these not emergency, very luxurious, but massively important functions that come from the prefrontal cortex. Here's a visual for folks who experience learning a little more easily that way. Same idea. So these slides are actually from Bruce Perry's lab. And he is someone who's studied, trauma and fear and its impact on the brain for a really long time. There is a link down here to a YouTube video. So during the pandemic, actually, Bruce Perry made a lot of his findings public domain, which is really cool because they used to, slides like this used to only be available to folks sort of in his program, essentially. So the slides are his, they're screenshots from the video below, and then the captions are mine. So on the left over here, we see the functions of a brain in a fear state, right? So this in particular is a flock freeze state, which is part of sort of the fight, flight, freeze continuum. So this is somebody who has fallen into fear and they are but they're probably going to a bit of a shutdown mode and or looking to really connect and be with other people to feel safer. So in this brain, we see a lot of activation down here in the survival-y stuff. So the brainstem is kind of working overtime. There's 60% activation there. Brainstem and diencephalon are both pretty somatically based, right? So in this case, the brain is really making sure that there's a lot of activation in the body and the muscles, right? So we're ready to run, we're ready to fight. A lot of energy is going to the body itself and to the brain structures that govern the body. There's a lot of activation in the limbic system as well. So the limbic system is that seat of primal emotions that often is, centered in the amygdala. And then up here, we have only 10% neocortex. So the neocortex is this top and front of the brain, right? It includes the prefrontal cortex. And if that is not engaged, right? If the limbic system is super engaged, but the neocortex is not, then we feel like sort of a live wire, right? We've got a lot of feelings going on and almost no wisdom to buffer it or to partner with it. On the other hand, if we look over here at a calm brain, right? We see almost an exact flip, which I just love the elegance of that. So when the brain is experiencing basic safety, it really kind of phones in the somatic stuff. It's like, it doesn't seem like she needs to, run or fight right now. So we'll just kind of let the lungs and the heart kind of go on autopilot. That's fine. There is actually increased limbic activation. So when we're calm, we have more access to our emotions. Sometimes I think about that as having access to the heart. And that is partnered by this beautiful 85% activation in and access to the neocortex. So I think of that as the mind or the wisdom that we usually experience. So when we're in this calm state, we have this wonderful and uniquely human opportunity to move from our heart, right, from our intuition, from our gut instincts, tempered by wisdom, right? Ability to think ahead, ability to problem solve, ability to, kind of think about our own thinking. And that's when we can do our best work. It's also important to remember, so that, a safe brain is a smart brain. That's true for everybody. And then that impact is compounded for folks who don't fit sort of the default expected box that our society draws. And so as we know, our society is generally set up by neurotypicals for neurotypicals. And of course, it's inherently very stressful to navigate a world that's not built for you, right? So for our neurodivergent students, their balance beam of basic safety is already thinner, let's say, right? Just by virtue of needing to navigate a world that's not built for your neurotype. So typically our neurodivergent students, because of that context issue, need extra care from us in order to stay on their balance beam of basic safety, because they are more vulnerable to coming off of it, again, even just due to contextual factors.